What should you do with your 401k when you leave your job? What changes with your 401k when you turn 55? And where can you get free investment advice that is priceless? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 111th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, this podcast is sponsored by Betterment, the most preferred automated investing service. Betterment has cutting-edge technology to optimize returns, minimize taxes, and save you time and money. Join over 34,000 customers who have already streamlined their portfolio management at betterment.com/roller. That's betterment.com/ROLLER.
So I just got back from FinCon, the Financial Bloggers Conference that my good friend Phil Taylor puts on from ptmoney.com. He and his team just did a fantastic job. It's fun to watch this conference grow. I've been all 4 years. The first year was outside of Chicago, and I think there were about 200 bloggers there. This year there were 600. And it's just amazing to see the organizations that come together to really put together a fantastic conference. I got to meet folks from Vanguard, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Betterment, Personal Capital, Future Advisors. The list goes on. And of course, it's a great time just to meet new bloggers, to meet up with bloggers that I've known now for quite a long time. I had the opportunity to speak on a podcasting panel, which was a lot of fun. As you know from my last few episodes, I've been battling this cold that's lasted about a week now. It's funny, when I was there, a couple of people said, "Man, you've got a great radio voice." I said, "No, I'm afraid it's just a head cold." So I'm still battling, and hopefully I can get through this podcast without coughing in your ear. That's my goal. You know how I hate to edit podcasts. It's one of the things we talked about on the panel. Is I don't like to do post-production editing. I like for you guys to hear, for better or worse, the real thing. And so I rarely edit podcasts. So hopefully I can get through this without coughing in your ear. But FinCon was just a great time. I've got a lot of interesting interviews set up with folks that agreed to come on the show. So you'll hear those over the next few weeks and months. I'm looking forward to those interviews. And in fact, want to start doing more interviews than I've done lately. I'd like to really work in an interview or two every week. So that's something that I'm going to be working on. It's going to take me a little while to get that into the pipeline, but that's one of my goals. So today, we've got a couple of things lined up for you. Again, all answering reader or listener email that I've received that we're going to cover. The first is from a listener named Rob. I get a lot of email from Robs and Roberts, which I think is kind of funny. But anyway, from a physician. Actually, I get a lot of email from physicians too. So, who had a question. Actually, this is something he emailed me quite some time ago, and I've long since responded. But it has to do with moving from an advisor to handling his own investments. That's the quick email to start the show. The main topic is from a listener named Juan, and it is, what should you do with your 401k or a 403b if you work for a charity? What should you do with it when you leave your job? So that's the main topic for today's podcast. That's what we're going to cover. And then we're going to finish off the podcast with a tip of the day, and it's a tool called Acorns. So that's what we've got in store for you today. Let's get started. So to begin with, here's the email from Rob. He says, "I just signed up to receive your newsletter, and I'm looking forward to getting advice from you. I'm a physician in New Jersey, and I've been using a financial advisor who has been investing my money, both pension and non-pension, in mutual funds over the past 8 years. His fee is 1% per year, and the mutual funds all have expense ratios between 1 and 2%. I just opened up a Vanguard account, and I'm considering transferring all of my money into Vanguard funds, specifically one of the target retirement funds. My thought is that I would save the 1% fee per year, and the fund expenses are much lower. What are your thoughts? Also, do you have any recommendations on specific mutual funds, Vanguard or other, that I can put my money into for the long term that would be better than a target retirement fund? Well, those are some great questions. And as I said, of course, I responded to Rob's email some time ago. And my thoughts on this is probably will be a surprise to absolutely nobody that listens to the show for any length of time, is that if you have the time and are comfortable investing your own money, I think you absolutely should do it. There's no reason to pay an advisor 1% of your money every year for the rest of your life if you're comfortable doing it yourself. And that's spoken from someone who just took and passed the Series 65 exam and is moving towards becoming an investment advisor to help people manage their money for a fee. And if a potential client were to come to me and say, well, Rob, I think I'm comfortable investing my money on my own. Should I hire you instead? My answer would be absolutely not. Hiring me should be the last thing you should do. Why in the world would you hire anybody to manage your investments if you're comfortable doing it yourself? Now, not everyone is comfortable doing it themselves, and not everyone has the time to do it themselves. Now, some listening to that might say, well, it doesn't take any time at all. Yeah, I get that, but having talked to hundreds, thousands, I guess by now, readers and listeners to this podcast, readers of my blog for the last 7.5 years, there are just some folks that don't want to do it, and they're willing to pay 1%. But if you're willing to invest on your own and have the time to do it, absolutely. That's how I've managed my investments, and I know that's how a lot of you manage your investments. But the other thing that's interesting in Rob's email is not only is he paying his advisor 1%, but his advisor is putting him in mutual funds that are costing him an additional 1% to 2%. So these are obviously actively managed mutual funds. And so, the thing is you can't look at just the advisor fee. You have to look at the cost of the underlying funds as well. And so, he's looking at 2 to 3%, and that does not include transaction costs, because as we've discussed in the past, the cost of a fund to buy and sell securities is not included in its expense ratio. And for an index fund, it's usually not that big a deal because they're not doing a lot of buying and selling. All they're doing is the buying and selling they need to track the index. That's it. But they're not trying to pick winners and losers and constantly moving in and out of positions. And so an actively managed fund can have significant transaction costs. So Rob's move to Vanguard will save him a significant amount of money. Now, in terms of specific recommendations, what I said to Rob is, look, I can't make specific recommendations for you. It's interesting, as I move towards a business where I will be able to do that, of course, for a fee, whether you would have me manage your investments or not, I start to think about how I would handle that. And there's a lot that goes into creating an asset allocation plan and then picking the investments to execute on that plan. It's not just a 5-minute conversation and here are 3 Vanguard funds or Fidelity funds or T. Rowe Price funds. A lot goes into that question, including an investor's tolerance for risk, a lot of tax considerations in terms of where you should hold different investments, obviously your goals and time horizon. He mentioned their target retirement funds. We've talked about those in the past. I think most big mutual fund companies offer them. And I think that's certainly a great way to go. It's very easy. You can simply invest in a single fund and you're done. It's that simple. Now, if you want to get into more specifics, we've obviously covered this in past podcasts in terms of creating an asset allocation plan and picking specific mutual funds and so forth. So you can go that direction. Target retirement fund, I think for many people, though, would be just as good. And certainly as compared to paying 2 to 3% between advisor fees and high expense mutual funds, in my view, you'd be much better off. So there you go. Now, one thing I mentioned to Rob, though, in terms of specific recommendations is this: call Vanguard, or if you prefer, you call Fidelity or T. Rowe Price or wherever you're going to invest. I can tell you, they will talk to you over the phone and help you work through these issues. I did that with my father-in-law and Vanguard, and they were very patient and worked through the options with them, and we were able to, come to a good selection of mutual funds. So that was one of my recommendations to Rob was, if you think you want to look at something beyond a target date retirement fund and you're interested in Vanguard, give Vanguard a call. They will help you with that, and I've found that to be very helpful in the past. Okay, now on to the main topic of today, and that's from an email that I received from a listener named Juan. Here's what he has to say. He says, hello, Rob. You have no idea how much I have learned from you, to the point that for the first time in my life, I have all my finances on track. Yeah, love to hear that. All right. That part was mine, not his. Okay. However, I do not know what to do with my previous employer's 403b account. I have heard so many opinions and options, but I do not know which way to go with it, and so it sits there. Some information about me: I have a 403b with matching with my new employer. I have a Roth IRA, a savings account, and an account with a trading firm. I assume he means a brokerage account. Any help is greatly appreciated. So that's our main topic of the day. What in the world do you do with your retirement account at your employer? 403b, 401k are probably the most common. What do you do with it when you leave? So that's what we're going to cover today. I think this is a very easy question to work through. It's important. There's certain factors you want to consider, but I think it's a pretty easy question to think through and get comfortable with what's best for you. So this podcast shouldn't take that long. Let's work right through it. So first thing is to understand what your options are. So typically, your options, well, I should get one option right off the table. You could, of course, just withdraw the money, right? That's not the option we want, because then you're going to get it with taxes. If you're not 59.5, you're going to get hit with a 10% penalty. So that's technically an option, but I'm going to assume for the sake of this podcast that that's not what we're looking at. So what are your options if you want to maintain the tax-deferred status of your 403b or 401k? Well, there's three. You can leave it where it is. You can leave it with your current employer, your old employer. You can roll it over to a new employer, or you can roll it over to an IRA. Those are your three options. Now, I should say that it's possible, depending on the balance, that your old employer won't allow you to leave it in the 401k, because the one thing about 401ks and 403bs that you need to understand is this. The IRS allows these plans to do a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that the plans have to do them or offer them. For example, as you probably know, there are what are called Roth 401ks, Roth 403bs. Those are available. The IRS permits that kind of an account, but it doesn't mean that your specific plan has to offer a Roth option, right? Okay. Well, the same can be true with these rollover options. So depending on your balance, you may or may not be able to leave your retirement account at your old employer. But generally, those are your three options. You can leave it where it is. You can roll it over to your new employer. You can roll it over to an IRA. Okay. Now, those are the options. What things should you consider in deciding which option is best for you? Okay, the very first option, and I think by far the most important, is your investing options. As we've talked about in the past, that's one of the big potential downsides of a 401k or 403b. Sometimes they have lousy investment options. And so that's the first thing that I consider. Am I happy with the investment options that are available to me in the 401k of my old employer or not? And by that, I'm looking, of course, at the cost of the funds, and I'm looking at the specific investment choices. Now, for me, I've got taxable accounts, I've got a SEP IRA, employer-sponsored plan. So for me, I may only need one really good investment choice, and I could be happy with that 401k if I can allocate the funds in that 401k to that one choice. I don't need necessarily 5 great options. Now, in your case, it may be different, but for me, 1 or 2 options that are really good are enough. So that's my first and I think most important consideration. Are the investment options at your old employer good? Are the investment options at your new employer good? Now, let me just stop there. If the investment options at the old employer are good, you like them, I tend to think, well, just keep them there because it makes life easier. You don't have to go through the hassle of moving the money. And in fact, that's exactly what I did with my first employer, my first law firm. I was there 10 years. I left. I just left all the money there. I was happy with the investment choices. Ironically, 10 years later, I go back to the firm and I continue then pick up where I left off, contributing to the 401k. That's probably not for most people. Maybe that's an unusual occurrence. I don't know. But I was very happy with the options. And so I just saw no need to move the money. Now, for the 2 employers after that, I was not happy with the investment choices, and I rolled them over to an IRA. I'll get to that in more detail in a minute. But that's the very first thing to consider, the investment options. To me, that's the primary thing that should drive your decision. Of course, with an IRA, you control the investment options, in part based on where you open the IRA. We'll come to that too in a minute. All right. The second thing to consider is just simplicity. the fewer accounts you have, the easier it is to manage. That's true when it comes to rebalancing a portfolio and just keeping track of your investments. So I prefer simplicity. So in this case, let's say you've got great investment options at your new employer. Well, rolling your account over from your old employer to your new employer minimizes the number of accounts you have to deal with. So I suppose if you had great investment options at your old employer and great investment options at your new employer, you might consider rolling it over to the new employer just for simplicity's sake, one less account to deal with. I think that's an important consideration. Again, I think investing options is the most important consideration, but simplicity matters as well. All right, the third, the age 55 rule. This is one that I think a lot of people forget. This won't apply to probably most people listening to this podcast, but if it applies to you, you want to listen up. Here's the deal. If you leave your employer in or after the year you turn 55, you can begin to take withdrawals from your 401k without penalty. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, Rob, I thought it was all this 59 and a half. It is, except, I'll say it again, if you leave your employer in or after the year you turn 55, you can withdraw from your 401k penalty free. Now, what happens if you leave your employer at age 54? Can you wait a year when you turn 55 and then start taking money out? No. I'll say it again. If you leave your employer in or after the year you turn 55, you can take your money out without paying the 10% penalty. You, of course, have to pay ordinary income tax, assuming it's a traditional 401k or 403b. So here's the key. Let's say you turn 55 and you quit your job and you're excited about this rule that you've learned from the DoughRoller Money podcast. And you think, but I still want to move it over to an IRA to get better investment options. So let me do this. I'm going to roll it over to an IRA and then I'll start taking distributions. You can't do that. Doesn't work with an IRA. Works with qualified plans at your employer, 401k, 403b, for example. So this is a consideration in terms of what you're going to do with your 401k or 403b if you happen to fit within this exception. So if you're 55 or better, 55 or older, this is something you want to think about. If you roll the money over into an IRA, you can no longer take advantage of this exception. So that's the third thing to consider. Now, having said all of that, what have I done? As I mentioned, for my first employer, I left the money there. I did that because I liked the investment options. I didn't care for the investment options at my new employer, and I just didn't feel the need to roll it over to an IRA. As I alluded to earlier, with my second and third jobs, I rolled both of those 401ks over into a rollover IRA at Vanguard. And I did that because I wasn't happy with the investment options at those two employers. They weren't terrible, they just weren't great. And so I rolled the money over into an IRA at Vanguard, and now I can pick and choose what I want to invest in. Obviously, I can invest in Vanguard funds and ETFs, but I can always add a brokerage component to that IRA and invest in anything that I want. So that's kind of what I've done. In my case, it was driven largely by the investment options. Simplicity matters too, but for me, it was the investment options that drove that decision. Obviously, the age 55 rule didn't come into play since I'm not 55. So that's kind of what I've done. Now, some practical tips here. If you decide to move your investment, whether it's to roll it over to your new employer or roll it over to an IRA, you'll want to do a direct rollover. You get different terminology here. They're referred to as a rollover, a transfer. Here's the deal. You want to roll it over without touching the money. You want it to go directly from your current 401k to your new 401k, or directly from your 401k to an IRA. You don't want to touch the money. There is such a thing as an indirect rollover where you do touch the money. The money comes to you, and then you have 60 days to roll it over into the IRA, for example. The problem with an indirect rollover, there's a couple of things. One is they withhold 20% of the rollover for taxes. Now, yes, if you roll it over, you'll get that money back eventually, but you've got to come up with that extra 20% right now to roll it over, the whole amount, into your IRA. Who wants to mess with that? The other thing is if you miss the 60-day deadline, it's treated as a distribution, and you get penalized if you're not 59 and a half. and taxed. And the point is, with an indirect rollover, a lot of bad things can happen. A lot of things can go wrong. If you read on the internet, you'll see a lot of people say, well, it's kind of like a temporary loan because you have 60 days to play with that money and you can use it for something and then make up the money and get it rolled over before the 60 days expires. Yeah, that's theoretically true, but that's just a recipe for disaster. So if you do a direct rollover, you don't have to worry about the 20% withholding. You never touch the money, and it just happens. That's what I've done. Now, I think this tip, if you listen to nothing else in this podcast, this is the tip you need to listen to. If you're going to roll over your money, here's the first thing you do. Call the place that's going to receive the money, so where you're going to open the IRA or your new employer's 401k, 403b. Call them to initiate the process. That's the first thing you do. So if you're going to roll your money over to, say, a Fidelity IRA, call Fidelity. They have an entire team that takes care of these rollovers, and they will contact your current 401k or 403b plan administrator and start the process. I've done that before, and it just is the best way to get started, and it'll get done right. Same is true if you go with a Betterment, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, doesn't matter. Call the place where your money is going to end up to start the process. I've heard from folks that what they do is they call the place where the money is at the moment. And while that can work too, it can slow you down. Sometimes they're not quick to respond to you. The company that's going to receive your money, they're motivated. They're motivated to get your money into their account. And so that's how you start with a direct rollover. Like I said, I've done it now 3 times. I've done it with my second employer. I've done it with my third employer. And then I did it with my SEP IRA. I rolled it over from Scottrade to Vanguard. I think I've mentioned this. I love Scottrade. I think Scottrade is one of the best brokers, in part because they have offices everywhere. And that's why I opened up my SEP IRA there originally. But I rolled it over to Vanguard, frankly, as part of estate planning, because I thought if I get hit by a truck, by the way, that's my scenario for dying. I get hit by a truck. Anyway, if I get hit by a truck, I wanted to make things as easy as possible for my wife. And I thought simplicity is better. Fewer accounts are better. So I moved it from Scottrade to Vanguard. But that was my third rollover. They were all direct. In each case, for me, I just called Vanguard, and they have a whole department that does this. They took care of it. Very easy to do. It's a little nerve-wracking, particularly if it's a lot of money and you're kind of on pins and needles waiting for that money to show up in your new account. But that's how I've done it. It's worked very, very well. Now, the last thing I want to cover on this is if you're going to open up an IRA, that's what you're going to do. You're going to roll the money over into an IRA. That's the decision you've made. Where do you open it? How do you make that decision? So the first thing is, if you do use an advisor or want to use an advisor, obviously the place to start is with him or her and talking to them. But assuming you're a do-it-yourself investor, the key is to figure out how you want to invest your money. So, for example, if you want to invest in funds at Fidelity, then it makes sense to open the IRA at Fidelity. That's true if you want to invest in Vanguard, T. Rowe Price. If you have a certain fund company that you want to focus on, open it up there. The nice thing about that is not only do you invest for free into their products, but you can always have a brokerage component to your account to invest in other things, and that's what I do at Vanguard. The other thing is you have more and more money at one of these companies, you get better and better services. So at Vanguard, I'm part of, I think, what's called Flagship, but I get like 25 free trades a year, and I get a free advisor to help me. Of course, and they have different service levels at different account balances, so it can take some time to grow to get to those certain levels, but you get more services, so I think that's helpful. Now, if you're more one to want to invest in a broad array of ETFs and stocks, then I think a brokerage makes the most sense. All these brokers have IRA accounts as well. As I mentioned, Scottrade is my personal favorite. They're all good. I mean, the whole thing of buying securities has become very commoditized over the last decade. And so the cost of the trades, unless you're a day trader or an extremely active trader, the cost of trades has become almost unimportant. I mean, honestly, the difference between a $5 trade and a $7 trade is meaningless if you're like me and you trade 5 times a year, right? I mean, who cares, right? I look beyond that. The thing I like about Scottrade is they have offices everywhere, and I've used that when I had my SEP IRA there. So, I was very happy with Scottrade. But again, you may have a different broker. I've used Options Express, and I've been happy with Options Express. They have the $100 new account bonus. So that's one of the reasons I chose them for the Grow Your Dough Throwdown, which if you followed me, you know what that's all about. That's a friendly stock market game between a bunch of personal finance bloggers. For this year, we each invested $1,000, and we're going to see who comes out on top at the end of the year. I think I'm at like a gain of 32%, I think, so far. So I've been kind of fortunate in that game. But anyway, you may have a different broker that you prefer, but if you want to trade a lot of ETFs and individual stocks, I think a low-cost brokerage is the best option, whichever one you pick. The fourth option, of course, is a robo-advisor. That's the term that describes the companies like Betterment and Wealthfront, where you put your money in, you make a few small decisions. Well, small; these are significant, but like stocks versus bonds, how much you want in each, and then they for a relatively small fee will do the rest. So that's another option. Depends on how you want to invest. So there you go. Those are your options. I think it's a fairly easy decision to make. What drives my decision, as I mentioned, are the investment options at my old employer and my new employer. And then if I decide to go to an IRA, it depends on how you want to invest your money. But I think there are a number of good low-cost options that you can use. And again, if you do transfer your money, don't do an indirect rollover. That just is a recipe for disaster. Get the money directly from your current plan to wherever it's going to end up. It's easy, saves you headaches, and avoids what could be a very costly mistake. Okay, on to the tip of the day. And I started calling this, by the way, I don't know if you notice this. Sometimes I say a tool of the day. Sometimes I say a tip of the day. I've gone to tip of the day as a sort of general way to describe this. Sometimes, though, it's a tool. Sometimes it could be something else. Today, it is a tool, and it's called Acorns. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's kind of crazy. So acorns.com is it's a mobile app. But the idea, as best as I understand it, is it's a way to invest really small amounts of money every single month. Basically, what you do is you invest from everyday purchases by rounding up each amount to the next dollar automatically or on demand. So if you buy something for $1.50, you can round it up, and that extra 50 cents will go into your Acorns account. And they invest it at relatively low fees. It seems to be comparable to other robo-advisors. Since we talked about robo-advisors today, seems like a good segue. Their costs go up to 50 basis points. It depends on the balance. But it's kind of I guess the idea is a way to invest without feeling the pain. Sometimes it can be painful to invest. It's painful to let go of $100 a month or $500 a month or $1,000 a month or whatever, wherever you are. But the idea here is you make these small investments just from everyday purchases. Maybe you don't feel it as much, but over time, your investments can really grow. I've not gotten this app. I got to be honest with you. But I find it a very interesting. It's almost like a psychological approach to investing, getting over that psychological hurdle. I think I may give it a try. It looks kind of fun. I don't know. I haven't tried it yet, but I wanted to throw it out there to you because that's just what I do. So there you go, acorns.com. I've heard a lot of good things about it, but I've not given it a try yet. So that's just a little disclosure there. If I do, I'll share my thoughts on it maybe in a future podcast. If you've used it, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Again, acorns.com. I ought to reach out to them and see if they want to come on the show to talk about their product, see what they have to say. Maybe I'll do that. Anyway, there you go. If you have any questions about this episode or questions, about anything, personal finance, investing, or even life, what the heck, shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. I read every email, as you know, and I respond to every single email. And by the way, I collect them. I keep every single email I've ever received. You wouldn't believe the number. It's huge. Anyway, love to hear from you. dr@DoughRoller.net. And if you haven't, subscribe to this podcast. I don't know if you listen to every episode or not, but if you don't, or if you even if you do, but you just go to the blog, go to iTunes and subscribe. That would make my day. All right, man. Hope you have a great day. Until next time, remember, the best thing, and I mean the absolute best thing money can buy, is financial freedom.